You know what's the scariest thing in relationships? Not betrayal, not cheating. The scariest thing is when you're holding on with everything you've got, and the person next to you suddenly lets go, when you keep believing. But they stop. And everything falls apart, not because you're weak, but because they chose weakness first.
One click and you're with us together until we hit our first 1,000.
She was always stronger than him, not physically, in her heart. When he doubted, she would say, "We'll make it through." When he wanted to give up everything, she found reasons to keep going. She believed in both of them, even when he didn't believe in himself alone. And every time he fell, she lifted him up, again and again. Her friends didn't understand. "Why are you holding on to him so tight?" She answered simply, "Because love isn't just about when it's easy." And she really was brave. She overlooked his fears. She found words when he stayed silent. She paid with endurance where he paid with silence. Sometimes in a couple, one person holds on for both, but you can only hold on for two until the other decides to let go, and then all your strength turns into helplessness. There was an evening she remembered especially. He came home late, sat on the couch, and said quietly, "I can't do this anymore." She sat next to him, took his hand. "You're not alone. We're together. I can handle it for both of us." He looked at her with a long gaze, and in his eyes there was no gratitude. There was only tired indifference. He no longer wanted to fight. He no longer wanted to believe. And in that moment, something cracked inside her for the first time. Not because she was tired, not because she stopped loving, but because she understood. Strength has no meaning if next to you is a person who gives up. From that evening, her smile changed. She still said, "We'll make it through." But inside, her voice sounded quieter, because she already knew someday he would leave, not physically, with his heart. And then all her efforts would turn to ash. She wasn't afraid of difficulties. She wasn't afraid of struggle. She was only afraid of one thing, that her bravery would someday become unnecessary. And that's exactly what started happening. Love isn't an endurance race where someone has to win. It's a marathon where both run together, and if one drops out of the race, the other, no matter how strong they are, can't run alone. She still held on. She always held on. When he lost his job, she said, "We choice, it's just a job, we'll find a new one." When he came home with drooping shoulders, she met him with a smile, even if she herself cried in the bathroom. When he said, "I can't handle this," she answered, "I'll handle it for both of us." She became his armor, his wall, his justification to keep living. But this came with a price. Every night when he fell asleep, she sat and stared into emptiness, pretended that her strength was infinite, pretended that her faith wasn't cracking. You can hold on for two, you can believe for two, but you can't live for two. One day they were sitting in the kitchen. The evening was quiet. She was telling him about plans, about how they could go somewhere else, start over, try again. And he suddenly looked up and said, "Why? I'm tired. I don't care anymore." These words hit her harder than any scream. She was waiting for support from him, at least a crumb of hope, at least a spark. But in his voice there was nothing, only emptiness. She fell silent, and in this silence she suddenly understood. All this time she thought she was holding both of them up, but actually she was dragging dead weight. The next day she woke up before him, looked at his face, at eyes that once glowed with dreams, looked, and felt something slowly breaking inside her. She still loved him. But love without mutual strength is like a boat with one oar. You row, 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 and still stay in the same place. We're used to admiring the bravery of those who carry everything on themselves, but we rarely think about how heroism becomes a trap. You prove you can, and end up alone. In the evening he said again, "I don't see the point." And for the first time she didn't answer. Just sat across from him, looked into his eyes, and thought, "Is there any point in holding on if only I'm holding?" She remembered everything she had endured for them, how she lifted him up after failures, how she fought where he gave up, how she believed where he stayed silent. And for the first time in all this time, she became scared, not because of difficulties, not because of problems, but because he really didn't want to fight anymore. Love isn't the strength of one person. Love is the endurance of two. When one lets go, the other inevitably falls. And it doesn't matter how brave they were before that. She always told herself, just a little more, one more day. He'll manage. I'll handle it for both of us. But one day she noticed that even her voice sounded different. Not firm, not inspiring, but tired. He stopped fighting completely, stopped dreaming, stopped even trying to seem alive. And her bravery, which she wore like armor, suddenly became heavy, like shackles. A strong person can hold the world on their shoulders. But if next to them is someone who chooses weakness, the world still collapses. She noticed how she began to laugh less often. Before, her laughter was a weapon against his fears, and now it was disappearing. Like light disappears in a room where the lamp hasn't been turned on for too long. He spoke less and less, and each of his silences was heavier than a scream, because in a scream there's emotion, but in his silence there was nothing. One evening she started a conversation again. "Maybe we could go somewhere together? Just us, you and me." He shrugged his shoulders. "I don't see the point. Nothing will change anyway." She looked at him and felt the wall she had built for years falling inside her, falling quietly but irreversibly. She went out on the balcony, wrapped herself in a blanket and looked at the city lights, thousands of windows, thousands of lives, and in each of them people were either holding each other or letting go. And for the first time in a long while she thought, what if I deserve someone who also holds on? Strength doesn't mean carrying for two. Strength is finding someone who will hold on together with you. Otherwise, your heroism turns into slow suicide. She remembered their first days. His smile, his words, "We'll make it through." And she realized he's no longer that person. He gave up, and by doing so, he took away from her not just support. He took away from her the faith that her bravery had meaning. That night, she didn't sleep. Sat by the window and tried to find an answer. How much longer can I? How much longer should I? And suddenly understood, this was a question without an answer, because as long as he had given up, she would always be alone. In the morning, she looked at him with a long gaze. He slept peacefully, as if problems didn't exist in his world, and she felt hurt. Hurt for herself, for fighting for two while he chose silence. She whispered into the emptiness, "I'm tired of being strong where you choose weakness." And in this phrase sounded what she feared most of all. She began to let go, not his hands, but her faith in him. Love doesn't collapse when difficulties appear, but when one person stops fighting. Because two against the whole world, that's strength. But one against silence, that's a slow ending. That evening she looked at him, and for the first time saw not the man she loved, but a person who had already given up. He spoke the usual words. Everything's complicated. Nothing will change. But his voice sounded like he was signing a contract with emptiness. She sat across from him and suddenly understood. This is exactly where their story ends. Not because she stopped being brave, but because his weakness made her bravery unnecessary. She slowly stood up from the table. He didn't even lift his head. And that was louder than any answer. Her chest was boiling. All the years when she held on for two, all the nights when she saved him, forgetting about herself, all the minutes when she believed in them, alone. And now a new kind of bravery appeared in her, not the kind that fights for two, but the kind that knows how to let go. Love is held together by matching endurance. If one gives up, the other can pull. But if they pull forever, they become a slave to someone else's weakness. She was brave, but her bravery would no longer be wasted on someone who chose to give up. Now her courage is directed forward, toward a new life, toward herself. And this is no longer the end. This is the beginning.